Hello and welcome. It's May 20th, 2020, and this is Vlog to the Future, an experiment, an attempt at speaking to the future. Why would you try to do such a thing? Well, I believe it's relevant for the climate crisis. I believe we live in an age that fixates on the present and neglects the future. Of course, you might object. Isn't that the case for all ages? We live in the here and now, after all. True, but different ages have thought of time in different ways and emphasized different aspects of time. For instance, the ancient Romans were all about history and tradition. To them, the past was more important than the future. To quote a scholar quoting another scholar, the Romans tended to be suspicious of novelty, and the word novus had for them a sinister ring. They were conservative like that. But in the late 1800s, after a century of great technological and societal change, people were all about imagining the future. For instance, in popular utopian novels, where a hero would wake up, for some reason, far, far into the future, and the book would basically be all about, hey, look at how awesome the future is going to be. Today, however, we don't think a lot about the future. We can barely even imagine it. We think a little bit about the past, but we think about the recent past, and for nostalgic reasons. Instead, we're fixated on the present. I think it's because we have so much to deal with right now. There's just so much stuff that makes you outraged, scared, sad, in a word, engaged. And the internet makes all that very addicting and profitable. Click on your browser and get sucked into the spectacle, the videos, the scandals, the flame wars, the rage machines, the echo chambers, the memes, the conspiracies, the constant feed of news, information, online personas, parasocial relationships, opinions, ideologies, death and abuse and danger. Go online and get sucked into the big now. All while ads scream at you to buy stuff. Everything happens at once. It's addicting, but overwhelming. It's what Douglas Rushkoff would probably call present shock. I say probably because I haven't actually read the book by that title. I just find the idea of present shock interesting and intuitive. The book, which bears the subtitle When Everything Happens Now, is on my very, very long reading list. Anyway, just because I haven't read the book doesn't mean I can't cite it via Goodreads and Wikipedia, right? According to Rushkoff, via Wikipedia, today, rather than focusing on building a better future, society is primarily concerned with building a worthwhile present. Yeah, I just wanted to comment on this after the fact. Worthwhile. Not good, not sustainable, not fair, not even better, just worthwhile. We're not setting ourselves up for disappointment here. Or maybe we are, even when we set the bar that low. And according to the description on Goodreads, while the 20th century was obsessed with the future, the 21st century is obsessed with the present. Which is unfortunate, because the future is about to crash in on us. It already is, to be honest. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The internet is not the only place where you'll see this presentism, for lack of a better word, in action. You can also see a complex sense of it in popular culture at large. At least if the late Mark Fisher is to be believed. According to Fisher, our present moment is haunted by both the recent past and so-called lost futures. We are haunted by the recent past through nostalgia. Consider how so many movies and video games and TV shows and even YouTube videos are either remaking or reimagining or referencing stuff from the 80s and 90s, which to many people was the last time the world felt safe and made sense. To explain the concept of a lost future, let's go back to those utopian novels. The super awesome futures of those late 1800s novels seem antiquated today because the actual future turned out to be not that. The same is the case for science fiction movies from the 1950s. Watching a film like Forbidden Planet, which, by the way, stars a young Leslie Nielsen. Huh? Airplane? The Naked Gun series? Only 80s and 90s kids will know. Today does not evoke the future. It instead evokes how the 1950s imagined the future was going to be like. It's a lost future. By the way, as an aesthetic and a style, this kind of thing is often called retrofuturism. Examples of retrofuturistic styles would be steampunk and the Fallout series. But the concept of lost future is distinct for the following reasons. But it's not just that these specific futures didn't come to pass. The future itself seems to have been cancelled, in Mark Fisher's expression. When we do imagine the future, we either get very, very depressed, or we rehash whatever vision came before, like from 80s and 90s sci-fi. Another lost future. To summarize, what characterizes our culture, to quote Fisher, is that the past cannot be forgotten and the present cannot be remembered. He might as well have added, the future cannot be imagined. By the way, most of this stuff I've ripped off from this video by Cuck Philosophy, so I recommend you check that out afterwards. However, this limited time frame isn't just restricted to the internet or to popular culture. Take a look at how we work. More and more of us are part of the precarious gig economy, where steady employment has been replaced by Ubering and freelancing, and where you can't really plan for your future because you don't know how much or when or if you're going to work. It's an existence where you don't worry so much about the end of the world as for the end of the month, because you have bills to pay. So perhaps it's no wonder that when we seek escapism, it's towards the familiar and the nostalgic that we gravitate to the last time the world felt safe and made sense. At the end of history. Yeah, let's go there. I think a lot of this will make more sense if we go back to the end of history. As the Soviet Union collapsed, Western liberals cheered because they took this as proof that capitalist liberal democracies had decisively won the ideological war of the 20th century, that it was destined to reign supreme as the only system that works. All that was left to do was minor improvements. It was the end of history. The future had arrived. The future was cancelled. There is no alternative, they said. And so we got stuck with an economic system that is currently wrecking our planet, and which, to quote one of my favorite YouTubers, doesn't care about the future survival of our own species. It cares about supply and demand right now. Everything is about supply and demand, and sales and profits and growth and progress right now. The privileged among us today have grown up with a story of progress. The story of progress is as much of a vision of the future as we were ever going to get. How's the future going to be like? Exactly like now, just better. For the past 100 or 150 years or so, we expected our children to lead longer, healthier, safer, richer lives than their parents. But this is no longer self-evidently true, if it ever was. Because even though we've already seen greater fires and bigger storms and half of all wildlife disappearing since 1970, we're only seeing the beginning of the age of climate change. Things will get worse. So we're trapped in the present. We can't imagine the future. We're forced to rehash and repeat the recent past. And all that is bad news when you think about the climate crisis, which is inherently about our future. According to Naomi Klein, the author of This Changes Everything, which is arguably the best book on climate change out there, this is part of the reason why we have a climate crisis right now. Just when we needed to slow down and notice the subtle changes in the natural world that are telling us that something is seriously amiss, we have sped up. Just when we needed longer time horizons to see how the actions of our past impact the prospects for our future, we entered into the never-ending feed of the perpetual now, slicing and dicing our attention spans as never before. I'm sorry if all this was kind of esoteric and hard to follow. This is an experiment, and I am nothing but a humble amateur philosopher. The point I'm belatedly getting at is that when you don't think about the future, you don't think about future people. They get marginalized. Even though our actions today and in the next 20 years will have massive consequences for centuries and even millennia to come, the people impacted by those consequences have no say. They rely on climate activists to speak on their behalf. You could say that we are temporally privileged. Okay, this needs explaining. The term temporal privilege already exists, but it's not common at all, and its meaning is either theological or crusade-ological, or uses a joke to spoof the idea of privilege in general. So I propose the following new definition of temporal privilege. It's a privilege one has by effect of being born early enough to 1. Avoid the worst effects of climate change, 2. Benefit from the use of fossil fuels and an abundant ability for the Earth system to absorb excess carbon emissions, 3, and this is most crucial, take climate action. I have temporal privilege over someone born today. Climate models often talk about how much the shit's gonna hit the fan in 2100, and before then, but the graphs often stop there. By 2100, I'll probably be dead, while someone born today can reasonably expect to live until the age of 80, at least based on life expectancy. But maybe that whole concept needs an overhaul. I have benefited from living in a high-carbon civilization, and will likely benefit from it longer than someone born today. That is, if the shit really does hit the fan. Which brings us to the most important point, taking action. I can vote, I can make my interests and opinions heard, I can take part in activist efforts and try to make the future better, while someone born today, well, give them a break, they were just born today. This point is so important. Right now, we can actually do something. We can actually do a lot. But the longer we wait, the more limited our options will be. Because there comes a point where we've added so much extra carbon to the atmosphere and heated up the Earth so much that global warming becomes self-reinforcing, also known as runaway climate change. I made a video that explained a bunch of these so-called feedback loops. Also, our actions today and in the next 20 years will have massive consequences for centuries and even millennia to come. That 20-year figure isn't something I just made up. It's from a perspective paper by Stefan et al., Trajectories of the Earth System in the Anthropocene, popularly known as the Hothouse Earth paper. The paper explores the possible future paths of the Earth system, and here is one of the most profound points it makes. We argue that social and technological trends and decisions occurring over the next decade or two could significantly influence the trajectory of the Earth system for tens to hundreds of thousands of years. So yeah, I was wrong actually. I misremembered. Our impact isn't even on the timescale of centuries and millennia, but tens to hundreds of thousands of years. You have to stand in awe at that. This is the textbook definition of Anthropocene, of humanity as a geological force. You have to stand in awe at the power we wield right now. All of us, polluter and activist alike. The polluters can destroy the Earth for tens to hundreds of thousands of years to come, while the activists can save the Earth for just as long. Look, I'm not saying this is an easy fight, because the forces that wish to keep emitting are powerful indeed. But it's a fight we can actually have. And it's one I think future people want us to fight. Because I suspect that if future people could talk to us, they would never stop talking about climate change. So while we can't communicate directly with the future, I think it's worthwhile to try. If nothing else, the attempts might be insightful and useful. A creative exercise. I invite anyone watching this video to try to talk to the future yourselves. You don't have to get weird or nervous about it. Just talk to the future as you would to anybody else. Try to strike up a friendly conversation with the future. I think that's needed. So with all that out of the way, and without further ado, hello future people! How are ya? How's the weather? Time is on my side. Yes, it is. Time is on my side. Yes, it is. Looking for a good time, 'cause you wanna be free. And you come running back. And you come running back. And you come running back to me.